تبارك الذي نزل الفرقان على عبده ليكون للعالمين نذيرا.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. الحمد لله رب العالمين والعاقبة للمتقين والجنة للموحدين ولا عدوان إلا على الظالمين، ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، ونشهد أن سيدنا وحبيبنا ومولانا وملجأنا محمدا عبده ورسوله. أما بعد. My dear respected brothers and elders, my honorable mothers and sisters, esteemed ulama ikram, alhamdulillah, it's a great blessing of Allah tabarak wa ta'ala for this auspicious and this Mubarak night. Here we are seated inshallah, and as the night progresses, as the evening progresses, we will see a lot of accomplishments made in regards to the Holy Quran. And this is truly the fadl and karam of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is truly the infinite mercy of Allah tabarak wa ta'ala. And also credit goes to the esteemed ulama ikram who are seated on this stage and their tireless effort day and night, working on the people, working on the masses. We make dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give these ulama ikram a long, happy life full of khair and afiyat. And we make dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allows us to sit at the feet of these ulama to learn something. It is narrated on the authority of Anas bin Malik radhiyallahu anhu. He narrates that the Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam mentions that inna lillahi ahlina minan nas, that verily Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has people from the humans, from mankind. قالوا من هم يا رسول الله. The Sahaba, as curious as they were, they asked, Ya Rasulullah, who are these people of Allah? Who are these family members? Ahl also means family members. Who are these people of Allah? So the Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he mentions Ahlul Quran, Ahlullahi wa khassatuh, that the people of the Quran, these people are the people of Allah. Not only are they just the people of Allah, they are the special people of Allah. They are the chosen and selected people of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, one thing that I've experienced and one thing that I have been noticing for the past couple of years and the past couple of decades is, although alhamdulillah there is a lot of shawq amongst the parents to enroll their children into tahfidh programs, there is a lot of shawq in the parents to encourage their children to be connected to the Quran, there isn't much shawq or enthusiasm within the adults and the parents themselves to learn the Quran. And subhanallah, there is one joke that I remember reading many years ago, that once there was a kid who was in the bathroom and he was singing a nasheed. He was singing a poem, طلع البدر علينا من ثنية الوداع, a very famous poem talking about the Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam coming to Madinah al-Munawwarah. When the father heard this, he went to the bathroom and he hit the child. The child started crying profusely. The mother stepped in and interceded, and she's asking that, why'd you hit the poor child? He's crying now. The father says that he has no respect for the Quran. He's in the bathroom and he's reciting the Quran. So the mother then clarifies and says that, طلع البدر علينا, it's actually a poem, it's a nasheed. It's not the verses of the Quran. Then the father starts crying profusely. The mother asks him that, first he was crying, now you're crying, what's going on? Why are you crying now? So the father replies that I have been reading طلع البدر علينا in my salah, in my namaz for the past 30 years. Although it is a funny, it's supposed to be a joke, it's supposed to be a funny incident, it shows and it highlights a sad and stark reality. Us being Muslims, being born into the religion of Islam, alhamdulillah, being, trying to practice the religion of Islam, a lot of times we are not able to tell the difference between the ayat of the Quran and the hadith and a nasheed and, for example, kalamun nas, somebody speaking Arabic. The question that comes to mind is why? Why is it such? A lot of times when we ask ourselves, or when we ask people around us, why is it such that the children are doing tahfidh, are connected to the Quran, but the adults not so much? A lot of the common answers we get, or the excuses, or the obstacles, or in reality the wasawas of shaitan that are in our minds, is that I'm too old. I'm too old for this, right? When we look at all of the hadith, when we look at all of the ayat of the Quran, not a single place is age mentioned, right? Not a single place it's mentioned that only, for example, the children should be memorizing the Quran and the adults should not be. Not a single place will we see this. Also, one great example that we can use for this is when we study the seerah of our Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam, we see that prophethood was, gifted to him at the age of 40, which also means that the wahi in the revelation of the Holy Quran started at the age of 40, which also means that our Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam started memorizing the Quran at the age of 40, right? That's one thing that we should also try to think about, that our Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam started memorizing the age at 40, started memorizing the Holy Quran at the age of 40. Similarly, when we look at the lives of the Sahaba radiallahu anhum ajma'in, we will see that only a handful of them were young when they accepted Islam. The majority of them were in their 20s and 30s, 40s and 50s. We see that there's a handful of Sahaba, for example, the likes of Anas bin Malik radiallahu anhu, the likes of Abdullah bin Abbas radiallahu anhuma, the likes of Abdullah bin Mas'ud radiallahu anhu, the likes of Mus'ab bin Umayr radiallahu anhu. They were in their 10s and their teens when they accepted Islam. The rest of them, they were in the latter part of their lives. But that did not stop them from accepting the Quran. That did not stop them from embodying the Quran into their lives. One other common waswasa, or one other common excuse or obstacle that we may face or we may bring up to not learn the Quran is that it takes too long. It takes too long, right? This also, subhanAllah, when we look at the life of the Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we see that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, from the moment he got prophethood until he returned to Allah tabarak wa ta'ala, his entire life was Quran. He embodied the Quran. He recited it. He propagated it. He lived the Quran, right? Similarly, when we look at the lives of the Sahaba radiallahu ajma'in, we see that the Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam taught them to do the same exact thing. That when they were going through any difficult time, they would resort to the Quran. Anytime there was some sort of difficulty, they would go and resort to the Quran. To the point that when the Sahaba radiallahu anhum ajma'in realized that there was a need to compile the Quran into a physical book form that we have today, they went ahead and they did it. Because they had that concern within them. That the Quran, this is the Kalamullah. This is the way to success. This is the way to salvation. They understood this very well. One other excuse that may come to mind, or one other waswasa that comes to mind is, it's difficult, it's challenging. Now, my brothers and sisters, my elders, when has a challenge ever stopped us from doing something that we want? We always hear people in their adult lives, in their 30s and 40s and 50s, they go to pursue a higher knowledge. I personally know this one brother, who has 4 or 5 kids, who has a full-time job. But he recently got his master's degree. One time I was asking him that, brother, how did you manage it? It's difficult to pursue a master's degree with a full-time job and 4 or 5 kids. He told me that, every Saturday and Sunday I commute down to Richmond, 1 hour plus away. And I study there Saturday and Sunday 8 to 10 hours. And I come back home at nighttime. So for the dunya, we are able and we want to make sacrifices. But why is it that when it comes to the akhirah, we don't make sacrifices? And always remember the promise of Allah tabarak wa ta'ala, وَالَّذِينَ جَاهَدُوا فِينَا لَنَهْدِيَنَّهُمْ سُبُلَنَا. That Allah tabarak wa ta'ala is promising to us that whosoever struggles and sacrifices for us, لَنَهْدِيَنَّهُمْ سُبُلَنَا, we will guide him to our path. Imagine once we started struggling and once we start sacrificing our time and our money and our wealth and our health to learn the Quran, to get closer to the Quran, won't our lives be full of barakah? Won't our lives be full of guidance? Won't our lives be full of the mercy and the acceptance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Now after I've mentioned all of these points, one other question that might be in our minds is that, we don't have any classes for adults in our area, right? This is also a valid concern, that there's no classes for adults for tahfidh in our area. The reason, my brothers and sisters, we don't have any adult classes in the area is because there is lack of interest from the audience. There is lack of interest from the adults. If the grown-ups get together and they come and they approach the ulama, that we want a class, I guarantee that inshallah the ulama will provide a class for you. I'll tell you a secret formula. Or a shortcut to start any sort of class for adults in our area. Gather 8 or 10 people with the like-minded interest. Whether you want to start, let's say, tahfidh program for adults, or let's say tafsir, or let's say a hadith, or aqidah, any sort of class. Gather 8 or 10 people from your family, from your friends, and approach the alim, approach the local scholar, and tell him that, Ya Shaykh, Ya Maulana, please teach us. We're a group of 8 or 10 people. We want to memorize the Quran. We want to learn Aqidah. I guarantee you, inshallah, that the alim, he himself will either find time for you. If not, then he will find somebody for you, inshallah. Now, there are so many ways that we can connect to the Quran, but the main thing that we should have in our minds is we should want to learn. We should want to listen to the Quran, memorize the Quran, accept the Quran, be in love with the Quran. One of the ways that I usually recommend to my students, and I recommend to everybody, is listening. Once we listen to the Quran over and over and over again, inshallah, it will go into our brains. It will sit in our brains. We may have noticed that a lot of times if we listen to a surah on repeat, maybe we listen to Surah Kahf on Fridays, or maybe we listen to Surah Yasin in the mornings every day. Or for example, we might play Surah Waqi'ah and Surah Mulk at nighttime for our children. When we do this, a lot of times we are able to follow along with the Imam, right? We are able to follow along with the Qari, the reciter. Also, if the Imam is reciting these surahs in the Quran and he makes a mistake, we are able to know that this Imam made a mistake. And later on, we go and we tell him that, Ya Shaykh, Ya Imam, you made a mistake. SubhanAllah, this is the miracle of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, how He has made the human brains. That when we hear something enough times, we are able to memorize it, and it's embedded in our brains. So this is one thing that we should try to be doing. Maybe we can be driving to work and back and we put on a surah that we want to memorize, a surah that we want to learn. A lot of people that like Surah Rahman. Maybe we can put Surah Rahman on repeat, and by the end of the week, by the end of the month, inshallah ta'ala, we will know Surah Al-Rahman. I'll mention one last incident before I conclude, is that it's an example of how sitting and being around the Quran has a huge difference and can make somebody a hafiz. I met this one brother in 2010, I believe. I was talking to him about, normal things, and somehow the topic came to the Quran. And he asked me that, test me from anywhere you want. So I said, okay. I opened up the Mus'haf, I opened up the Quran, and I tested him from one spot. When I started the ayah, he was able to complete it. Then I tested him from a second place. He was able to complete that ayah. I tested him from multiple places throughout, the Quran, random places, randomized, and he was able to complete all of the ayat that I presented to him. I asked him, are you a hafiz? He said, no, I'm not a hafiz. I was surprised and shocked. I said, how is it possible that you are doing what huffaz do, knowing all of the ayat of the Quran, yet you claim that you're not a hafiz? How is that possible? He tells me that, I'm from Morocco, and in Morocco, every single day, after every single salah, the imam would sit down with the mushaf, with the Quran open. The congregation, the jama'ah, would make a circle around him, and we would read the Quran out loud, audibly. And who knows, maybe they would do 1 khatam per month, or maybe 1 khatam per 2 months. But subhanAllah, it took him to a level. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blessed this brother so much that now he was at a level that you mention any ayat of the Quran, immediately he knows what's after that. So my brothers and sisters, my elders and mothers, my honorable mothers, esteemed ulama ikram, the message here is not to show anybody down or to look down upon anybody. The message and the reminder here is to wake us up, that we need to rekindle our relationship with the Quran. We need to be from the Ahlul Quran. We need to make a habit, make a routine of either listening to the Quran, or maybe memorizing the Quran, or trying to recite the Quran, trying to sit with the Ahlul Quran. We make dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes us from the Ahlul Quran. We make dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes us from the people who do the ittiba' sunnah of the Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And we make dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us a good life full of amal and a husn khatima when we pass away. Wa akhiru da'wana and alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.